Great. I've got Johnny D. Boggs. And I've noticed on your website, which I'm going to plug right now, johnnydboggs.com, you put the D in there. What's the D for?
It's my middle name. It's it's Johnny Darrell Boggs, if you need to know.
Yeah.
Darrell was my father's name.
I've got the same thing with mine, but I'm James Mark Sublette. I understand. I do.
But I had always gone by Johnny Boggs, and my first job out of college was a sports writer at the Dallas Times-Herald. And my editor says, "Why don't you use your middle initial?" And I said, "Well, why?" He goes, "Because Johnny D. Boggs flows a lot better than just Johnny Boggs." And I said, "Well, sure, put it in there."
He's right.
Yeah, but I remember they sent me out to the bureau, and it was Arlington Bureau, and the first guy another reporter came up to introduce himself. "Are you Johnny D. Boggs?" He thought I was French.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. And when he heard your South Carolinian
I
accent,
said, they don't sound like this in Paris.
Yeah, let's start with that. I'm kind of interested. So you grew up in South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
And were your mom and dad South Carolinians as well?
They were South Carolinians. My mother's family were longtime South Carolinians. They came over in the 1720s.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather came from Illinois. So they try to keep that part quiet on my side of the family, because my great-grandfather was, he served under Grant, the Civil War.
So your great-grandfather was a Yankee,
Yes.
and clearly the other component of yours were not.
Clearly. But they tried not to keep. My great-grandfather's name was Ulysses. And I said, "Well, Ulysses? Yeah, that's how they said he pronounced it." And I said, "Probably because he knew if he pronounced it Ulysses in South Carolina, it wasn't going to go over too well." Yeah, my grandfather was Ulysses. Oh, okay. But Ulysses. So I grew up in the South, in tobacco country, heat, humidity,
all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. And I tried to figure, how does a guy from South Carolina become a Western writer? And it kind of struck me, well, you know what? The West was a long way from those swamps and tobacco farms that I grew up with.
Yeah, but there is some kind of that ruralness.
Right.
And they're also, they like history there, I bet.
They do.
I mean, you think about the places, and I haven't really visited South Carolina much, but if you think about all those plantations, those historic homes, they take that stuff seriously.
They do. They take it very seriously, and they love their history.
They're proud about it.
They are very proud about it. Sometimes too proud. But
what does that mean?
Well, there's some things do you really want to be proud about that?
Oh, yeah, more of the Confederacy kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, my great-grandfather was in Andersonville.
Which side?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good question. You're right. No, he was a Yankee side.
Yeah, that's really. And actually, there was Florence County, one of the worst prison war camps was in Florence, South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of history there.
And what did your mom and dad do?
My mom she was the proverbial Southern housewife who ran the family and did all the food and was excellent with the back end. And my father was a building contractor. And then we had a tobacco farm or cash crops with tobacco, sometimes cotton, soybeans, whatever. He kind of subleased that, but he was a building contractor. So I worked in construction. And I was kind of like Elmer Kelton, the great Western novelist. His dad told him, says, "You need to find another line of work." So when my dad retired as a building contractor, my kid sister got the router, the miter box, and all those things. She was much better at that than I was.
And you started off early on, because I read your bio, which is a really interesting bio, by the way. But you started writing early, like third grade you started doing.
Right. Third grade, the English teacher said, "Write a story, just write a tale. You're making something up." And I have no idea what I wrote, but I remember that feeling I got. And I said, well, this is pretty neat. You mean I can make things up and get away with it? And started thinking about that. And so grade school, people would come up to me and says, "Well, can you write me a story?" "Well, what do you want?" Science fiction? Okay, I can do that. A mystery? Sure. Thriller? Okay, yeah. I didn't write too much westerns at that time, but
you were actually selling those, right?
Yeah, selling them for like a nickel, a dime,
So you're making more
yeah,
then than
that's
you are
right.
now. Yeah.
Absolutely. My royalties were a lot better back then.
And do you remember your third grade teacher? Was she
Mrs. Maynard? And I just remember the name mostly on third grade, and I can picture what she looked like. But yeah, I don't know if she was that much encouraging, but later through school, the other teachers were like, "You really should do this. Keep it up, keep it up."
Did you enter any contests or anything?
I did. I can't remember what it was, but a friend of mine, a classmate of mine, and we both entered this story that I guess our parents found out.
Mm-hmm.
So we both wrote something, and I always like to brag that his was rejected before mine was. So he got the rejection first, and then I got one a couple of days later.
But even at that point, you were thinking about.
I was thinking this is really what I want to do, and I had no idea how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point in high school, I started, I played on the varsity football team. I wasn't good enough to play baseball in South Carolina. It was a pretty good baseball team, but I kept the book. I was the manager, so I was keeping the scorebook, and part of my job was to call in the results to the local newspapers, radio station, TV stations. And I started, looking at the newspapers, and I said, well, wait a minute, maybe this is how you make a living writing. I can be a sports writer or a newspaper journalist, and then at the same time kind of write on the side. And so I went to the University of South Carolina. I majored in journalism, and like I said, the first job out of college was at the Dallas Times-Herald. So I was kind of in the West, if you consider Dallas the West.
Well, it's interesting, because I interview a lot of artists.
Right.
And I see this recurrent theme going on in artists, and you're an artist.
Right.
And the theme is that early on, usually somewhere in the 3rd to 5th grade, that they get some encouragement by an art teacher and recognition, and that sets the tone.
It does.
And you fall right into the same thing as the artist.
I interview for magazines, artists all the time, for various magazine articles. Do you live in Santa Fe, New Mexico? They say, well,
yeah, that's true.
I don't really know a whole lot about art, but the journalism background says, well, you do some research and you can, get your way through it. So yeah, but every artist I've ever asked, and the first question you ask, how'd you get interested in art? Well, it's ever since I was a kid.
Yeah, and they win something usually.
Right. They get that encouragement.
Yes.
And I got the encouragement early on from
Maynard, Mrs. Maynard.
Yeah. And then Mrs. Langston was like 4th or 5th grade. And she always said, I believe she made it up, but she always says that I would be writing short stories while she was giving the lecture. But whenever she called on me, I'd know the answer. I said, well, I'm not sure about that.
How did you do in school? Were you a good student?
I was a good student.
Yeah.
I was about a B student. I was a B student through college. I was never quite made the A list too often, although my final semester at the University of South Carolina, I was a 4.0. Well, but that's journalism. You're taking your core classes then.
Yeah.
You should be pretty
well,
good
you
at
were
that.
doing the things you loved at that point.
And that was true too.
And what did your mom and dad think when you go, I'm going to go to journalism? I mean, that's really out of the wheelhouse from what they were doing.
Yeah, it was. I think my mom really, her ideal job for me was be teaching English and coaching baseball at a South Carolina school. My dad was really good about it, and my mom was too. My dad was, I can't live my kids' lives.
Yeah, that's
which was really neat. Yeah. But they were pretty cool. And but I learned, I was writing Southern stories as much as I was writing Westerns at that time.
And those were historical at that point? Or
the Westerns were, I don't know, what were the Westerns? The Westerns short stories were kind of all over the place. Little blend of maybe literary and traditional, but the Southerns were pretty autobiographical. And I sent the first Southern story that I had published back home, and I learned if you want to stay close to your family, you get these Southern stories published, keep them to yourselves. The Westerns you can send home, and those things, even if the Western characters were based on people I'd known growing up. But I said the Southern stuff, that can get you in a lot of trouble.
Because they took it too personally.
They did.
Yeah, they saw themselves. Or, this is me. Or, why are you writing about our family?
I sent the first story home, and I said, don't do that again.
And who gave you grief about that?
Both of them. Yeah,
your mom and dad.
Well, my mom was always she was hard shell Southern, and still is hard shell Southern Baptist, and it was like, I don't know where you picked up this language, but
it was the language that bothered her.
The language bothered her a little more, and then some of the stories, and then like I said, I learned. Mama really doesn't need to be reading this short story.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of the language.
Yeah. Well, because she could affect you or tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing.
Right.
That takes your creativity out, I think.
Yeah.
So that didn't take you long. And when you were sending those back, was that from like college that you were doing that?
The first couple, I had a couple of Westerns actually published in the literary magazine at the University of South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
And
that's fantastic.
And then working in Dallas, I'd send off these short stories to literary publications that were paying me 2 contributors copies, maybe $5. Once I got an offer for $100 for a short story. It was a Western short story. And they folded before they could publish a story or give me the check.
Or give you the money. And what was the first paying gig? Do you remember your first paying story that you got?
I think it was $5, and it was for an anthology. And it was a Western short story. Kind of a Southern Western short story. And I got $5, and I said, okay, I'm a professional writer.
Well, you are, technically, really.
Well, yeah.
And that was in college?
That was in, that was 80s. I was out of college. I was working at the Dallas Times-Herald, and I was writing fiction.
You graduated in 84?
I graduated college in 1984. So it was probably 88, I think, when the first published short story outside of college made it into print.
And what did you do for those 4 years after you got out of college?
I was working at a newspaper. I worked at the Dallas Times-Herald.
So that's when you moved to Dallas.
I moved to Dallas right out of college. Actually, before even graduation, I was driving out to Dallas.
Why Dallas?
It was a job offer.
Yeah, there you go.
And it was luck. I mean, you go from South Carolina to a city of 1 million to a Pulitzer Prize winning paper with a circulation of 220,000 daily, 300,000 plus on Sundays. But they were expanding. They were opening up a new zone bureaus, like they were opening up 4 zones, and they needed sports writers to cover these zones. And I just happened to be one of the lucky ones. One of my professors had met a associate managing editor at a convention or something like that, and he came up to me in the hallway and said, "Write this guy. Tell him you met me. Tell him I met him at a convention and that he used my name, and tell him I said that blah blah blah. If they have any need any questions, call him." And I always said, I don't know what photos he had of this guy, but I sent it in with a resume and they called me up and I got a job.
Yeah. You made a good connection.
I made a great connection and it was great training. I mean, newspapers at the time, it was a competitive market.
I bet.
It was high stress and it teaches you there's no such thing as writer's block. You've got to write with clarity and brevity. And you've got to be timed. Yeah, you file on time always. And I did that for about 1.5 years, and then I was out in Arlington, which is a long way from Dallas, and I said, your chance of advancement is probably better working on the copy desk than it is being a reporter and closer to Fort Worth than you are to Dallas. So when they asked me if I would be willing to move to the copy desk, and I did that. And within a few years, I was copy desk chief in sports. And a year or so after that, I was assistant sports editor in charge of the night operation.
And what do you do in that? What's your job in something like that?
Your middle management, you're managing the shifts, who's working on each night, and then you're kind of in charge if something happens. And there was always something happening.
So like breaking news kind of thing?
News.
But all sports related,
But
right?
all sports related. And then, sometimes a story breaks that is sports related, but it's also something that's worthy of the front page cover and things like that. Billy Martin died on Christmas. I was working that night, and I was like, okay, we've got to do something here. Then the paper closed in 1991. And I went to the Fort Worth Star.
And it just closes.
It was bought out by the competition.
Okay,
Dallas,
there you go.
The story there is my wife and I bought a house. The house was built in 1941. We moved in on December 7th, 1991. And on December 8th, we got the first call saying, we just bought your paper and we're shutting you down.
So for those who don't know the December 7th, 1941 reference, that's Pearl Harbor. And so the day afterwards, I
was out of a job.
You were out of a job. That's got to be a scary situation.
It's very scary.
Do you have any kids or anything?
No, we had no kids. But
you had a house payment.
We had a house payment
and you were at
a car payment. And the plant closing law guaranteed me unemployment or a severance pay for, I think it was 3 months or something like that. And about the time the severance was running out is when the Fort Worth Star-Telegram hired me. And again, I had to start up. I was in charge, and I'm back to just working as a general copy editor on the sports desk. And again, I moved up to assistant sports editor in charge of the night operation.
Over time.
Uh-huh. I was there for about 6.5 years. And in 98, I was just thinking I was freelancing enough outside of the newspapers, working for some magazines. I think I had sold a couple of novels, very low pay. But I was just thinking, you know what? This newspaper gig was it was fun when you're in your 20s.
Yeah, because you're 35 now.
Yeah, I'm the 30s, and I was like, yeah. And so I kind of came home. I was working nights. I'm working 4 to 1. My wife is working. She's selling ads at the time, 9 to 5. We never saw each other. Her friends always said I was a figment of her imagination. And I just came home one night. She hated her job. I'm getting burned out working newspapers. Yeah. After all those years, and I came home and she's sobbing in bed, and I'm like, why don't look, here's an idea. And it's kind of as a joke, but I said, we sell the house. We moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. We'd been to Santa Fe twice. It was never really on our radar. Mm-hmm. And you get a job, and I'll stay home and write full time. And she says, that's a great idea. I said, okay, now let's go to bed. But she called. She believed it. And she called, and she got the job. And all of a sudden I said, well, wait a minute. The first person to look at the house actually made a full price offer on it. I said, okay, now what am I going to do?
This is like 89?
This was 98.
98. So in 98, both of you kind of needed this change.
Yeah, I think so.
But she really spurred it on.
She spurred it on. She was very supportive.
And what was the job she got in Santa Fe?
She was selling ads for a magazine that didn't really pan out. And then we had a kid, and then she decided she wanted to be a realtor, so she kicked us out of the house every day so she could study for the real estate exam. And my son was 4 years old or something like that, and she passed the real estate exam. She loves it. But it's kind of frightening there because you've got a realtor and you've got a writer. You don't produce, you don't get paid.
Or if you have economic turndown.
Right.
Which can easily happen.
That can happen. In fact, we had the crash right after she got her real estate license.
2000.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal.
And you were about 37 or so at that time.
It was.
So you have a kid.
Frightening. Yeah.
You've been 2 years in Santa Fe, and now and you're writing.
I'm writing. I'm writing all the time. I'm writing books. I'm writing magazines. It's the saying, you never turn down an assignment when you're a freelancer because you don't know who's going to read it, and it's a paying gig, and it doesn't matter if they're paying you $25 or $2,500. You take the job.
And do you still feel that's the case?
I'm a little more selective, I think, a little bit.
Not so much for you, but for you,
writers,
I'm sure. But for other writers,
no. And I always, I just told a couple of magazines a little while ago because the books were so piled up. I said, I can't really do anything for you until September. Yeah. And you it's still a bit of fright. Because you say, well, you know what? Are they going to call you back in September? Yeah. Because they don't like rejection either. Yeah. But right. Yeah, so it's it's a fear. You read these interviews of like Buck Owens, Johnny Cash, all these great musicians who grew up in abject poverty, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Then they become famous and they work themselves hard. because of the fear of having to go back to that poverty.
Well, and your parents too are Depression era.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
From the South,
right?
No less,
yeah,
and they still have a history of what can happen
right,
in the South.
Right. So it's always a little bit frightening. When I'm teaching at a writers' conference or writers' workshop, the first thing I tell the writers, they don't want to hear it. I said, "Don't quit your day job.
Yeah,
this is a tough way to make a living."
I think it's the toughest.
It is.
I think it's a lot harder than being a artist, a painter or a sculptor. I think it's, you may go, from books, it could take you 4 years to get a book out.
Sure.
And you've got to support yourself in between. There's a lot of people who want to write and they'll do it for free or undercut you. And
it's hard. It's nerve-wracking. It's not for everyone. You set your own hours, but you don't produce, you don't get paid. And if the book doesn't sell, there's always a good chance the publisher's going to say, "You know what? We can't use you anymore." So,
have you had that happen?
Yeah, I've been dropped before.
Yeah,
yeah.
When did that happen?
I did a 3-book deal for Penguin Putnam. One of the books won the Wrangler Award from the Oklahoma National Cowboy and Hall of Fame Museum in Oklahoma City, and it was really good, but the books didn't sell.
And so they just.
And so
how did they let you know? Did your agent
were like,
let you know?
Well, there's like no, we really don't want any more of these books, and it took a while. I mean, I was getting published with other publishers, but they weren't the New York houses, and they were like, it took a while before the failure of those books to produce kind of goes into the back of the system, and then people start looking at you and they say, "Okay, we'll take a chance on you every now and then." But the awards are great, and I love the awards, and it's a tremendous honor. But it's a business. The bottom line is sales.
Yeah. And so when you have something like that, the Penguin Press says, "Oh yeah, you won awards, you did 3 books, they don't sell." Do they come to you and say, write in a different genre, maybe something that will be more sellable because they see you're a good writer? But
some have suggested that a little bit, but they've never actually come through and said, "Yeah, why don't you do that?" Because the other thing is you get typecast a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And they know I can do a Western. Can I do a thriller?
Right.
We'll have to see. I mean, yeah, if they came up to me and said, "Can you do a thriller?" They'd probably want to see an outline, a detailed outline, some sample chapters and stuff like that. And, writing's writing. But, can I do that? I don't know.
You can do it, I'm sure.
Well,
but would you do it? That's the question.
Sure.
I love that. See, that's a writer. To me, that's a writer.
Right.
Because you're willing to do it because you know that's your job.
Right. No, and writing is writing. And, and I always say, you can find a book that says how to write a mystery novel, how to write a romance novel, how to write a Western novel, how to write a thriller novel. They all say pretty much the same thing. It's all about character. It's all about driving it, giving something that the readers can identify with, and there are different little formats maybe they want to throw in there, but it's all writing.
Dialogue.
Yeah, dialogue.
Don't kill the dog.
Don't kill the dog. Absolutely not. All right.
I mean, it's funny, but to some extent, I think of those things even when I do it.
I was at a writers group. I was actually in the audience, and they were reading. They had a literary agent and a book publisher, and they were reading like the first page or something like that of a manuscript, and then they would critique it. And I was like, "Ooh, this could be kind of ugly." Yeah. And it was one of them was that you killed the dog. No, it's going immediate to the rejection file. So you can't do that.
I know. It's a real thing.
Yeah. You can kill Old Yeller at the end.
Yeah.
But not on the first page.
But definitely not on the first page. So you're in Santa Fe. And you're working. Are you starting to do magazine articles for art magazines too? Because you've done a lot of that.
I've done a lot of that.
Yeah,
right.
you really have.
And that was just the fluke of living in Santa Fe.
Or the fact you were there. I don't know if it's a fluke. I mean, to me, something sent you there.
Sure. And what I didn't realize is it's an accepting community.
Especially for artistic types.
Right. And, writers, we always say, are the lowest form of artists and the lowest form of celebrity, but it is an art form.
Yes.
And you are creating.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yes. And so it's very accepting. And there are a number of writers there Writer's kind of
Hampton
Sides, great guy, great writer.
He's one of my favorite writers.
Superb historian.
Just love his stuff.
I was actually at there's a fundraising thing called the New Mexico Writers Dinner. It's an annual thing in March. It's been going on about 3 years, and it's just to kind of help out beginning writers and stuff like that. And this past March, I was there again. And this woman says, "Come on, sit over here. We'll see if we can sit at this table." And they sat me down. And I'm between Hampton Sides. And David Morrell's
also
on the
a great
other
writer.
David Morrell's
Rambo
on the other
series.
side. Yeah. And Douglas Preston of Preston Childs. And I'm between Hampton Sides and Doug Preston. And they're just, "How do you do this? What's your favorite Western movie?" They're just talking to me. Wait a minute. I'm at the big boys table, and these two fabulous writers are asking me about my craft. I said, am I dreaming?
Well, I think the only difference between them and you is not the writing ability. Your writing ability is just as good. It's just that they have found that audience, whatever it is, and they're paid for it at a different level.
Sure.
And I understand that, but I bet they've read your books. And I bet they liked him. And you know, it's a weird thing when you don't think you maybe should be in that level, but you really are.
Right.
And it's hard for you to see it, but I think other people would see it. I guarantee at this Western Writers Association, you'll be at some table, and there's going to be a writer who's going to sit next to you that's maybe done 2 or 3.
Right.
And they're going to feel like you're that guy, just like they do.
No, and I was like, "Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah." But Western.
But I would feel the same way for sure. I just bought Hampton Sides, Blood and Thunder. I bought a secondary copy just because I couldn't find my first, just because I wanted to reread it. It was just as good. It's just so good.
He's just the ability to weave in all this great history with a story that just kind of resonates today. That's hard to do. But he's a brilliant writer, a great historian, and a really funny guy.
Yeah, I've heard him talk a few times.
Yeah.
Well, so when you started writing in these art magazines, did you have to educate yourself about art?
Sure. As much as the artists.
Yeah. And how do you go about doing that? It's
a lot easier now. I mean, you can go back. I mean, they give you an assignment. They say, "Can you interview this artist?" And if it's a contemporary artist, you go to the website and you research as much as you can about them. You look at their art. You try to figure out their backgrounds or whatever, and then the rest of it's just like you're interviewing anybody else. I mean, it's the same questions, how you get started, and then you let the interview take its own course. You don't. I think you can anticipate an answer. Like you always ask, how'd you get started? And you kind of know what that answer is going to be, but sometimes maybe it's a little different, and you have to be prepared to let the interview do itself and go wherever the interview takes you. Don't try to formulate the interview and how this article is going to pan out.
You mean actually listen?
Yeah, you listen. Yeah. And that's, newspaper training. You're a trained observer, but you're also a trained listener. And you can try to figure out what works and what. And sometimes an interview is just terrible. And you got, oh man, how am I going to make this work? And then sometimes you've got so much great information, you got to figure out, wow, where do I go? Where do I start? How do I do this? And that's the challenge, but that's kind of
that's
the fun
probably
part.
The art of it too.
That's sure, it certainly is.
What's going to be important to the reader, and what you have to have fun doing it too.
Well, people always say, "Is it fun to write?" And I always say, "Well, it's I like to have written."
Yeah,
with actual sitting down there and actually write. Yeah, it is work.
No, it's absolutely work.
Yeah.
People ask me that same question.
Yeah, it's like,
and I've never said it's fun.
No, but I know other writers said you're a liar. Writing's fun. And I said maybe for you, but for me, it's hard and it's work and it's taxing and it's a job.
I look at it almost like a workout.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, because at the end of a workout, I feel really good, and I'm glad I did it. But that first bit was hard to get going, and I have a certain amount I got to do, and I like to do like 1,000 words. I'm going to do 1,000 words, period.
Right.
But when I'm done with it, it's like, oh yeah, I feel really good.
Yeah.
But fun?
No, I don't call it fun. But you get it down on paper, and then you can fix it. That's one of my approach. I was reading. There's a new book out by Robert Caro, who's done the LBJ and a tremendous amount of biographies. And he did a memoir on researching, writing, and work. And there was a line that he used. He said when he was first starting out, and he's a reporter for a newspaper, and he was really fast typer, and his editor said, "You'd be a lot better. You're good, but you'd be a lot better if you didn't think with your fingers."
Interesting.
It was a good line. I said,
yeah, it is.
And I can understand that a little bit because I'm a fairly fast writer. From the newspaper training and stuff like that. But then you go back and you say, ooh, wait a minute, you need to slow it down a little bit. And that's kind of hard for a next newspaper journalist to get into that thing. Think, slow it down. You don't have to.
That's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And have you been able to do that? Or,
no.
Yeah, right?
I try.
Yeah, I'm sure at some point in the process
that
probably the second or third or fourth draft, you're going slower.
So I'm going to do.
You're filling in.
Right. And then you're reading a lot slower. You're reading it carefully, and you're saying, "Wait a minute, this really isn't that clear. This really doesn't work. Would the character actually say that? Let's think."
It's really important.
Yeah, it is.
I just read your The Fall of Abilene.
Oh, okay.
Which was fantastic.
Oh, thank you very much.
It really was fantastic.
Really?
Yeah, no, it was, and I highly encourage people to take this book. I gave it a 5-star rating.
Wow.
But I listened for those. Components of description and continuity and story.
Right.
And you clearly weren't writing fast at those points because you got it right.
No, that one. Yes, you're right. And one of the things I took a number of theater classes when I was at the University of South Carolina, and did a little bit of acting here on stage and everything. But you do the approach the same way. The character, man walks into a bar. Okay, what's his motivation? Why is he walking into the saloon? To get drunk? Just to get out of the heat? I mean, you have to figure all this out a little bit. And once you find that motivation of the character, it's a lot easier to bring this character to life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I plot out. It's kind of a loose outline. It's not a very concrete outline because if you get a concrete outline and the story takes you in a different direction, if you follow that outline, it can be predictable. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing you can do in a book is be predictable. I have a loose outline of I know where the story's going.
And is that a written out outline or one in your head?
It's written out usually, but it's like just notes on paper.
Yeah, got it.
And it's just very loose. And
beginning, middle, end.
Beginning, middle, end. What's going to happen? Who rides into town? How much are you going to describe the town? That's really on the field. But I always try to make the dialogue off the cuff. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a regular conversation.
Do you see those characters in your head?
Yes, I do.
Too. Yeah. I mean, you feel them and you can hear
them
talking.
I can feel them. I can hear them. The interesting thing, a number of the books have been subsidiary rights have been sold to audiobooks, which is a expanding market now.
I listened to your book on audio.
Did you?
I did.
Okay.
And I liked it a lot.
Well, I haven't heard that one yet, so I was trying to figure out. But you listen to it and you go, well, that's not how I heard it in my head when I was writing it, but I kind of like that. That's a different interpretation. It's an artistic interpretation.
Yeah.
Acting is an art form too.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the great thing about listening to the audio books is sometimes you're driving in the car and go, wow, I actually wrote that.
I know the feeling. I did mine in audio too, and the first time I heard it, it was like, oh my God, that sounds better than my writing.
I said, I got to believe I wrote that. And other times you're thinking, oh my God, did I actually write that? Oh, where was my editor?
Well, how did you get into the historical novels? I mean, because that's really what you're known for, right?
Yes, I think so. I think the historical stuff's fairly. That's what people think, and they always say, "I mean, man, how did you get that history right?" And I said, "Well, you sure it's right?" Sometimes, I mean, you got conflicting things of history, but
and when you write that too, I mean, you're not trying to keep it all exactly correct,
and I say this is a novel. I mean,
that's what I wrote.
Don't quote me in your term paper.
Right.
Yeah, I'm writing fiction. I make things up. If I'm writing nonfiction, I try to get that a lot more accurate than the fiction. But the fiction is different. I mean, you've got to go for a little bit of a feel. But you do all your research, and you do as much research as you can. But then you've got all these conflicting ideas, these conflicting stories. What's different? And you've got to figure that out. But the bottom line is you figure out the character, and you get it as close to what you think would be right or what sounds right for the character. But the history, I was a lover of history just growing up, and it kind of bothered me sometimes when you watch a number of Western movies, okay, right, or any kind of movies. You go, well, you know what? That's not exactly what happened. It's not even close to what happened. Right. You want to get a little closer than that.
Right.
You want to get the basic idea of the history right.
Well, you did that in the last. In the Fall of Abilene.
Yeah.
I'd read Calvin's book on Wild Bill Hickok.
Right.
Before I read yours. And so I knew the facts.
Right.
And it was wonderful how you kept to them, and the important ones too. I know the ones that you got the right ones. And believe it or not, for me, it made the biography better because I could feel it in a different sensibility. Because I knew the facts.
Right.
And you kept pretty close to all the at least the important historical facts.
Sure.
And I kind of even knew those facts were going to be coming up, and I was excited to hear how is he going to weave that into the story. Right. But it did give me a different sensibility about the history because I could see them more in a humanistic form.
And that's what you really want to do in fiction is make the character. I mean, you write a story about the Battle of Little Bighorn, you know how it ends.
Yeah.
You write a story about Billy the Kid, you probably know how that ends. And when you're writing about history, I mean, people know that story. They know that general history of that. How do you make it real? How do you make it relevant? How do you make the reader want to keep reading when he already knows they already can guess what the ending is going to be?
Right, even if they don't know it.
Right. And so to do that, I think it's all about character.
And when you did that book, since it's the one we're talking about, and it's out, by the way, folks,
it is.
It's 2019. It's a brand new book. You got to go read it. Had that been ruminating in your head to do something with Wild Bill Hickok and Hardin and those guys?
I'm a huge fan of Wild Bill Hickok.
Yeah, me too.
I am actually. I've always he's just such a larger than life, and it's kind of a sad figure too.
Very much so.
Yeah, so I always kind of liked him. He seemed to be a fun guy. Hardin, not so much. Hardin is
cold-blooded killer.
Cold-blooded killer, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
homicidal maniac.
Yeah, he's a sociopath.
Actually, and the great biography of him written by Leon Metz. Leon always said after he wrote this book, he was like really disturbed because he was a cold-blooded, just vicious killer, just a mean SOB. But you you had to make him a little bit of human. I mean,
they were in some form or fashion. Even being a psychopath, he could have his moments, I'm sure. Yeah. Especially if you're a young kid, looking up to somebody like that. Right. So that one had been kicking around in your head for a while.
Most of them. I mean, people say, "Where do you come up with your ideas?" The ideas are I've got a computer. And it's just at some point you got to say, well, I think I want to write this one. And one of the things I've tried to do, not always succeeded, but I've tried to make the next book different than the one I just wrote.
I think that's smart.
Yeah, because
both creatively for you too.
When I was reading Louis L'Amour, starting off in my early teens, I was like, well, this is pretty much the same story I just read, and I can understand. And I'm not knocking Louis L'Amour at all because every novel I've ever picked up of his I finished. But it's like I think I'd like to do things different. Lauren D. Esselman, who's a member of Western Writers of America, has won 5 Spur Awards, tremendous writer. When I started reading him, before I even had any idea that I could actually write a novel, he kind of jumped out at me because every story of his was different. It was a different setting, kind of a different style, things like that. Russell Banks, great writer. He was pretty much the same way. Hampton Side, the nonfiction, he's going from different subjects to different subjects.
Massively different.
Yeah, I mean, but they're all about interesting people in a time of change.
Character-driven.
And, character-driven. And it's an emotional, hard time. And they're up against tough situations always. And how do you deal with that? And people handle stress different ways. So it's always about the characters.
And do you have more than one book going on?
I can't I can't write 2 novels at the same time.
Yeah, I can't either.
I can't just do that. It's like you get confused.
But I bet when you finish the one, you're right on to the next.
I'm ready to get the next one.
And you don't even want to think about the other one.
I don't think about the next one. After it's edited and done, it's out. And until I listen to it on audio in the car on a long trip,
it's done.
It's done. Yeah,
well, you've read it a million times.
I actually had a book once. I sent it off to the publisher, and my wife, she goes, "What do you think?" I said, "It's the worst piece of crap I've ever written. I just want it out of the house. I never want to see it again."
And it probably did fine.
It won an award.
Yeah.
I said, really?
But I think that's true sometimes, because I see this with artists, with painters, right?
Right.
Really great painters that I won't even mention their name, but I've had them say, "I don't think this is very good. What do you think?" Because they want my opinion.
Right.
And sometimes I agree, but usually more than not, I'm going to say it's fantastic, because it is. It's a really great painting.
Right.
But they're so close to it, or it's a little out of their realm that they do.
Absolutely.
They can't see it as being, that thing.
It's
and usually it goes like that. So
it's just a crazy thing.
So I don't see it being that different probably from writing.
No,
for what you
I don't
do.
think it is either.
It wins an award.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well.
And do you ever, for me, I do get these kind of aha moments when I write a book, when I start a book, that somebody will come in and say something to me, a story. They'll tell me a story of something of their life, something real. Mm-hmm. And I go, oh God, there's a nugget right there.
Yeah. You got to be careful what you tell me.
Yeah. So it's the same. You do,
yeah. You hear something and say, ooh, wait a minute. There's something there.
Right.
And it can be anything, a joke, just a line.
No, that's right.
Right. Actually, I was reading years ago, and I did a short story on it. But I was reading a biography of Daniel Boone, and it came down to when he was an older man in Missouri in early 1800s, and they asked him to become like basically a justice of the peace, and he'd hold court under this old elm tree, I believe, and they called it the Judgment Tree. Mm-hmm. And I just underlined that right there, Judgment Tree. That's a great title.
It's a book title,
right? And I said I can do a novel on that, and I wound up doing a short story. But just the words, the Judgment Tree. I said, bang, bingo, that's something there.
And did you work it backwards from that to do the story, or
right?
But you still using Daniel Boone?
Yeah, I do use Daniel Boone, and I use the title of the short story was the Judgment Tree.
Yeah, I had the same kind of thing.
So I mean, you get that, and you say, ooh. The Little Bighorn, there'd been so much written about that, and I just said I want to do it from multiple points of view, first person. I did that with Northfield, a novel I wrote about the Northfield, Minnesota raid, and the idea actually came from Shelby Foote's novel Shiloh, where he took first-person viewpoints from a handful of characters and just told the story of the Battle of Shiloh from this viewpoints of Confederates and Union soldiers. And I said, well, maybe that's how I'd like to do Northfield. And when I said, I'll just do a novel from like 6 first-person points of view. And when I started researching the Northfield, Minnesota raid, I said, there's no way I can limit it to 6 people. So it was like probably 20-something characters.
Wow.
Each chapter was a different first-person viewpoint. And that one you really had to get your outline down pat, because you've got to jump from a cold-blooded killer to a civilian to a 5-year-old daughter of one of the victims. But I did that, and
that probably was one of your more fun ones that you did too.
But the difficulty part of that was when you're writing from either first person or third person, and you're just limited to that viewpoint. You can go back and reread the previous chapter to just get into a feel and edit that, and then you start the new chapter. But this one was harder because every chapter was different. It's a different viewpoint. And it's a different.
It's a short story.
Yeah, it is. It's 20 short stories. So I did that, and it was very well received. And
what was the title of that?
Northfield.
Since I want to read
Northfield.
it now.
Yeah, Northfield.
I'm just going on my list right now, because that's a hard thing I think to do as a writer.
It is. It was very hard. And once I finished it and sent it off and did all the editing and it's published, I said, I'm never doing that again. And then I started thinking about Little Bighorn. I said, well, Greasy Grass. This would be my title, because that was the Lakota name for the river. And I said, I can do that, but I can't do that from just 20 viewpoints. So I think I did like 40-something viewpoints from everyone. And it's just, you get criticized a little bit because you can't really identify with one character. Yeah. Because every chapter, and some of the chapters are really short. Some of them are like a page. Some of them are a little longer. But I did that, and the idea was just to tell the story of the battle, and just tell the story of the Northfield raid, and make that the battle itself, and the raid itself is the character, and it's just different points of view. And you try to get as many Lakota, civilian, soldier, Cheyenne, Crow viewpoints as you could.
And then you also have to write Custer's.
Yes.
And that has to be hard because we have our set thought of who and what he was.
Right.
And so how do you go about not being prejudiced on that? Can you?
I think you have your own prejudices, but you read. I always say, I'm not a big fan of Custer. I certainly can't say I'm a fan of Jesse James.
Right.
But the extremes of Custer is he's either the glorious
Medal of Honor,
great guy, super leader, or he's just an idiot who gets his command wiped out, or Indian hating guy who gets what he deserves. Yeah. But there had to be something about him to have these men follow him.
Right.
There had to be, and Jesse James the same way. He's a cold-blooded killer.
So
he's a thug.
So you attack it from that point of view.
But he is somebody, and there has to be something about him that he can't be too one-dimensional. Let's put it that way. He's got to have that because people followed him. Yeah, and you go to Missouri, some people, you got to be careful what you say about Jesse.
Well, there's a lot of people named Jesse James.
I've got a
for a reason.
Yeah, one of my niece's sons is Jesse James. I was really okay.
And did they know? They did, but
yeah,
it's kind of lost what they don't read the history.
No, that's true.
Is the problem?
Yeah.
And so, how do you deal with language when you're doing these historical novels? One, you got to get it right, I assume, right?
Right.
You can't use terms that don't exist.
True. And I have period dictionaries on my desk, and the last thing I usually do is I go back and I try to say, was this word around then? Just because you make sure you get the right. But you have to cheat, because I've done pre-revolutionary war novels set in the South, which was the frontier at the time. And if I wrote dialogue as people actually spoke in the 1700s, or in some cases to the 1800s, it would not seem readable to today's readers. So you have to kind of cheat a little bit and kind of make it sound like it's authentic, but at the same time, it's something that people can understand. And
also just for race issues too.
Sure.
How do you deal with that? Because you know.
That can be kind of, especially in this day and age, it can be really hard.
I wondered about that when I was reading your book. How do you deal with, because would they say, how would they use some of those epitaphs that they used on some of the, and I thought you handled it brilliantly, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. But I wondered how you thought you must have had to consider
Well, growing up in the South, it was in the South during desegregation and things like that. I think it really made a big impression on me. So much that, the use of the N-word, I mean, it was really prevalent at that time. And in some cases it's still prevalent today, maybe too much. And I was, for a while I use it sparingly. I'm certainly not Quentin Tarantino style. Right. But at some point I just read that and I said, I need to eliminate this word. I can't use this word ever again. And it's a debate, and it's certainly a debate at Western Writers of America. Do you be period correct, historically correct? I mean, how do you do that? And I said, well, you can be historically correct, but my theory is the sooner that word is eliminated from our language, the better off this country is going to be.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And I just said, I'm done with that. And I can have him say something and you understand what he's saying, but I don't have to use that word.
That's right. Yeah. And you live in Santa Fe,
right,
which is one of the most culturally diverse.
Culturally diverse. There's really no majority.
There's not.
It's a third American Indian. It's a third Hispanic. Yep. It's a third white and other. Yeah. Which is a great place to live.
Yeah, I think it does give you a different sensibility of what America really can be and will be at some point in time.
Yeah, I hope so. But 1970s, I am their mandatory integration of the schools, and 15 miles from my house, they're turning over school buses. In protest.
Yeah, I did this. I went through us too. We did the same thing.
Yeah,
I
was like,
we didn't have that, but we had rocks and stuff being thrown. Yeah, it was a very violent time.
It was a terrible time. Yeah. You got Vietnam dividing us. You got all this going on. And you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and you're going through this. I think it really affected me.
Yeah, it did me, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
It made me think of things differently.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Our junior high student vice president and vice principal said, no Spanish will be spoken. I'm in New Mexico at school. Now, that didn't go over so well.
No, I can imagine.
Yeah, all the Hispanic Chicanos walked out, as they should.
Right.
But that was a big deal, and whatever that would have been, 72. Mm-hmm. And I remember trying to get a grips of what's going on, with your parents. Why can't they speak Spanish?
Right.
And and what do I have to worry about? Well, because that makes me, makes everybody kind of angry at each other.
No.
And so I learned, I think, from that, and it sounds like you had those same kind of experiences.
First and second grade, there was one black boy in my class, and I kind of thought he was cool. I liked hanging out with him and things like that. And my mom later told me, said, we couldn't throw a birthday party for you when you were that young because you'd wanted to invite him, and we wouldn't have had a problem with that, but the neighbors would have.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is.
But it's South Carolina.
It's South Carolina, and it's
early 70s.
in the early 70s. It was, but you kind of think, would I be a different person if I hadn't grown up with that? Would my writing be different than what I took? And if I had not been cognizant of what was going on?
That's probably why you think about your words so carefully. And I wondered about that when I was listening to that story, because I thought you did get it right.
Thank you.
And I figured you must have had some internal dialogue with yourself to, how do I handle this?
Right.
Because it's a question. And it's something I guess anybody who deals in historical fiction has to deal with.
Right. And there's always, do you want to be historically correct or do you want to be politically correct? And I said, just be true to whichever one you want. I mean, I always said, if you look at the 2 Academy Award winners for Best Pictures in the 1990s that were Westerns, Dances with Wolves, great movie. It's politically correct. They just kind of reverse the stereotypes.
Yeah.
Unforgiven, totally, there's not one redeeming character in that entire movie. They're all awful people. So it's very historically correct. And they both win Academy Awards.
Yeah.
So, just be true. You can be, there's nothing wrong with being politically correct.
Yeah. What do you give advice for young people that want to go into, I would even say not just writing, but your genre of writing, more historical fiction? Because it seems to me that the audience is changing for that,
right?
Especially for Western,
right?
Yeah.
And
what do you?
And we don't know. You don't know where it's going. But if you want to be, if you're going to write about history, you need to get the history right at least. But you also have to make it relevant to what people today. I mean, I think Americans haven't changed a whole lot. We still want the same things as we wanted in the 1800s and 1860s and early 1900s. I mean, people don't change a whole lot. The circumstances and the technology and the environment might change a little bit, but the people are pretty much the same. So I can take characters that I grew up with in the 1960s and the 1970s into the 1980s, and I can transport these people that I knew into the Western setting or the pre-Revolutionary War, the Revolutionary War settings, and just, adapt them into that time. How would Uncle Bob have acted on a Texas trail drive?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you see the audience changing for Westerns, and especially historical Westerns? I wonder about that.
Yeah, the audience is, I think
aging.
It's aging, right. And that's something that we had to reach out to and try to figure out. I was actually talking to a gallery owner or gallery director in Santa Fe, and we were talking about the same thing. Western films, Western literature, Western art, you're really in the same boat.
Oh, it is. That's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, no, it's an aging market, and how do you reach out to the younger people? Years ago, when my son was fairly young, and I told my literary agent at the time, and I said, I want to start writing some young adult novels.
But you just got a Spur Award for.
Right. And he said, don't do it. It'll kill your career. Don't do it. And I said, well, but here's the thing. If, I'm writing books for 70-year-old men, in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, I don't have any readers. And if we don't get our kids interested in the American West, in the American history, in reading, we're in a lot of trouble. And he said, I appreciate your sentiments. They're very noble. It'll kill your career. Okay, this is before anybody ever heard of what's now called crossover fiction. Means it's aimed for kids that adults can read, or it's aimed for adults and kids can read. And before J.K. Rowling and The Hunger Games and Rick Riordan. But I said, I'm going to do it anyway. He says, okay. And he could have dropped me. Could have said, you need to find yourself another agent. But he said, okay, you just do it. And then years later, shortly before he died, he called me up and says, and he never said this. He said, Johnny, you were right. But so you got to, and that's the challenge there. When I'm writing that, you want to write something that a young adult, especially a young boy, girls read anything, but young boys, they really want to read about boys, and that hasn't changed over since the 1950s, when, or even probably earlier. So you want to write something that will appeal to a kid, at the same time that's something that an adult can actually enjoy reading.
And that's is that your latest book that just came out?
It is, Fall of Abilene. I don't know how Fall of Abilene's one of those that you can, it's about 1871. The legend is John Wesley Hardin ramrodded a cattle outfit to Abilene, Kansas, where Wild Bill Hickok is serving as town marshal.
Right.
So I had this kid ride up with John Wesley Hardin, and then he gets put in with Hickok in Abilene's last year as a cattle town. So it was the idea of trying to put these two characters and have a kid who's comes up with Hardin, and then he's hanging out with Hickok, two extreme different people, but they're both cold-blooded killers, but for different reasons and so he has to grow up a little bit on his own.
Yeah, it's out there, folks. You got to get that one for sure. And you got your 8th Spur Award,
right?
And that's what you're in town for the Western Writers Association annual convention, and you're the biggest. I mean, no one's won 8. What's that feel like? I mean, that's a big deal. That's a lot of awards.
It's a lot of awards. I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
I've got 0, by the way, just in case anybody wanted
to. And like I said, Elmer Kelton had 7, and I just say, I'm not here without Elmer Kelton. I'm not here without Western Writers of America. Because all these writers that I was reading, all these writers that I know now, most of them are better writers than I could ever hope to be, including Elmer Kelton. Elmer was just a great, great guy, and he was very humble, gracious, and he was always willing to help. And he could be sitting with a couple of legendary writers, Max Evans and Don Goldsmith, and I could come up to him at the conference and they'd say, have a seat and join us. I mean, that was great. So it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around this. But I always say, bottom line is you win a Spur Award. It's a great honor. I'm not giving any of them back. But really what it means is, 3 people liked your book.
Yeah.
Maybe just 2.
Yeah.
But it's a little numbing. And when they found out I had won, I was, this is really neat. And then about a week later, it started hitting me, and I'd sit down at the computer and I'd just break down crying. I said, this can't be me. I can't have that many awards. I can't have more awards than Elmer Kelton.
Yeah. And does it put pressure on you for your next book? I mean, or any future books?
I don't know about the pressure. The pressure is always just getting the book done. I mean, that's enough pressure, and you don't really think about the award. I mean, you don't write a book saying this is going to be an award winner,
Right.
Because you never know.
Right.
And I've written books that, like I said, that I really, they were okay maybe, but I wasn't that overly thrilled with them, or short stories, and you think, okay. And then they win an award, and I said, okay, well, that's kind of really. And I've written books that I thought, well, this is maybe one of the best things I've ever written, and nothing.
Yeah, nothing.
So you never know.
And you love it. But
I love it, right.
And I had one of those. Still love it. Oh, well.
Yeah.
So you will be honored this week in Tucson.
Right.
And the Western Writers Association, if people are interested in Western books and historical fiction,
right?
How can they be a part of that through? Because they can't just be a member of that, because you have to be a professional writer.
To be a member, you have to be a professional writer. It means you have to have at least one book, one article. The rules are a little different on how you want to be, but you have to be a published author,
right?
To be eligible for that. But it's open to the general public too. Yeah. There are a lot of people. So some of the panels you can come in and pay a day fee and get in. You can figure it out. Log on to westernwriters.org, and you can find out about the convention schedule, what's going on. It's like I said, it's a great. We have 240 people registered. Who come to Tucson in June. Yeah. So
that's why I came back. I was in Colorado. I came back for this. God, June in Tucson. Why am I here? No, it's actually pretty pleasant. It's only like 100 degrees.
Yeah, it's nice.
And that changes every year.
We move from location to location. I think next year we'll be in Rapid City, South Dakota, which should be a little cooler than it is here.
There's one thing else I want to talk to you about, because
Sure.
we haven't mentioned it, but you're really an excellent photographer.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You tell me about your photography.
That came about in high school too. I just kind of grabbed a camera and I said, well, this is kind of fun. And it's mostly landscape a little bit. And then when working in the newspapers, occasionally they'd send me out to take a photo. Usually they had a staff photographer, but occasionally they'd need something, and I'd do that. And it's the same principle, I think, as writing. I mean, it's another art form, but it's all about, you've got your technical things. You get your aperture right, get your shutter speed right, depth of field. You learn all that, like subject-verb agreement and where to place the commas and stuff like that. But it's also framing. You're framing your story. Instead of framing the story with words, you're framing the story with what do you want in the camera? How you
want the reader or viewer
to see it. Right. Right.
And do you sell your photos? Can people buy your photos?
I've never. I usually just do them for magazines and fun. So
have you ever put them in your books?
Yeah. I've never used. Well, for a while, when I first joined Western Writers, maybe the second convention or the third, there was a publisher that was doing, instead of illustrations, they were running photos on their book covers. And I actually came up to the editor and I just sat down, and my pitch was, I'm a photographer, because I'd been rejected. This is before I was getting rejected. I was writing these pot boilers for this New York publisher, and that was about it. And I was pretty saying, well, your career's pretty much washed up. But, let's see, you're doing a lot of photography. So I came up and I talked to the editor, and I said, I do a lot of photography. And I had a binder with some, back then it was 35 millimeter slides. Yeah. And she went, well, yeah, you know what? These are pretty good. We could probably use you for something like that. You'd probably make money as a photographer for us than you'd make writing. So, well, that's really. But she said, okay, yeah, just send us some slides and we'll see what happens. So I was about to get up and I said, and you know what? I have finished this novel. And she goes, well, you could send that to me too. And that's actually how I got that. The photography actually landed me with the book deal, landed me with the agent, because I sent her the first 3 chapters, and she wrote me back and said, these are some of the best 3 chapters I've ever read, in several months. And she goes, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to recommend you to this agent. You write him and tell him I said to send him the first 3 chapters, and then the rest is really up to him and you, and we'll see what happens. And I sent the agent that. the first 3 chapters, which is kind of standard operating procedure, is you send usually a query letter, and then they'll usually ask to see 3 chapters and a synopsis, and you send that, and that's when they reject you.
Yeah.
But this
Multiple
time,
times.
it's you get used to rejection if you want to be a writer. And I sent him that, and he said, okay, let's see the rest of the manuscript, which rarely had happened. And I sent him the rest of the manuscript, and a few months later he called me up and said, okay, we'd like to take you on. But
what year was that?
98, 99.
And what else did he say he wanted?
He wanted to make sure I could deliver more than one book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you show that you can do that?
I said I've got another book in the works, and I had written these other books. I said I can get you a book, at least a book a year. They said it won't be a problem. So I sent him. I said, here's the book I'm writing right now. Gave him a little bit of description on that. Here's what I've got ideas for, and that was all it took. And he said, okay. And I was with him until he died, and I'm with his wife now.
That's a long time, since 98.
Yeah. And
it's almost 30 years. Over 30 years, 31 years.
Well, thanks for reminding me of that. But yeah, so the photography kind of got me into.
And
the
you
writing
think that photography, because she had this positive, she liked your photography,
right,
clearly.
She did.
That all of a sudden that put you in a positive mode in her mind as well, which helped. When she read your chapters, she already had a positive connotation with you.
I never really thought about that, but there could be something to that, because you're looking at the story, the visual story,
That's
and then
right.
you're working at the written
set.
stories. But it's the same idea. It's the same principle.
Yeah. I just wonder about that, because it's so competitive to get, and that extra visual aid that brought you a positive connotation of what you were capable of doing as a photographer. What could he do as a writer?
I never really thought about that, but it could very well be.
Good. I want to get at least one thing in this talk that you haven't thought about before, potentially, whether it's real or not. Anything else you want to say before we close this up? That we want to get your website too, Johnny D. Boggs. That's where they can buy the .com.
I'll link to. You can go to your independent bookstore or your book chain, or your public library usually carries a lot of my books. Oh, this is great. I checked out an audio book for the drive down here. So I went to the local library in Santa Fe, and I picked out an audio book, and I handed it to the person at the desk with my card, and she runs the card, and she looks at, well, you're Johnny Boggs. I said, well, yes, ma'am. We have your books. I said, I know. And he goes, we have a lot of your books. I said, yeah, that's really good. And they get checked out a lot. I said, well, thank you so much for telling me that. So it's like, that's when you feel like a celebrity.
That's when you go, does Hampton Sides get going? And are all your books on audio?
Not all of them, but it suddenly became such a big market now. Most of them are going to audio.
And does your publisher?
My agent handles all that. That's why I always says. I said, why do you have an agent? I said, because I'm a poor businessman. I'm poor at marketing. I'll be the worst salesperson you ever had. I can write sometimes. So I have an agent that handles all the business end and stuff like that.
And do you have Facebook, Twitter, or any of that?
I'm Twitter, my hashtag Johnny D. Boggs, and I do Facebook postings as frequently as I can. I'll be posting a lot from Western Writers of America this week.
Yep.
So it's great. Yeah.
Johnny D. Boggs, I'm a fan.
Thank
you for taking the time. I know you got to go get your 8th award, which is fantastic. Good for you.
Thank you.
And we will. I'll be looking for your next book coming out, because
I appreciate it.
Because you're a real writer. I know it'll be probably 12 months exactly or less from the last one, which is probably about right.
Well, December actually. I'm trying to do like 2 a year. For a year. Yeah.
And is that because you can do it, or is that because there's pressure for you to do it?
That's because they asked me to do it.
Yeah, okay. There's pressure.
It's like, there's pressure to do it, but it's also said, okay, so well, how can you write 2 books a year or 3 books a year or however? And I said, it's called a mortgage.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Do you hit it every day, 4 or 5 hours a day?
No, it's usually convention's a little bit different, but it's usually 5 to 6 days a week. I try to take Sunday off.
Yeah.
I don't always succeed. But I try to just to recharge and refresh. I mean, and people don't. It's not. I mean, I worked construction for my dad in South Carolina. This is not putting up rafters on a house in August in South Carolina. Right. It's not that kind of physical labor, but it taxes you and it drains you and it tires you out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can you go 4 hours in a row?
I can do 4. I can do probably 6, and then it's kind of you're doing more harm than you're doing good.
Yeah.
But it depends on the deadline. Am I up on my deadlines? Can I afford to take this off? Do I have to stop this and do a magazine article now?
Yeah.
But it's a job. I mean, that's what I tell people. I get up in the morning, I shower, and I'm walking to the office. My commute's a lot less than other people, but it's a job, and I have to approach it like a job.
That's right. I think that's a good way to end it. If you want to be a real writer,
right,
you better know it's a job.
Right, right. It's a job. And even if you've got a job and you're just writing on the side, take an hour a day.
Every day.
Take an hour a day.
So maybe Sunday.
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah.
I do it every day.
Every day.
I force myself some days. I mean, it's just like, I'm so tired. I'm tortured.
There are days
when I go and do it.
There are days when I really don't want to go into that office and turn on that computer.
Yeah.
But you make yourself do it.
Yeah, that's a professional.
Yeah.
Johnny D. Boggs, you're a professional. Thank you.
Thank you.
I look forward to your next book.
I appreciate that so much.
Thank you for taking the time. All right.
Great.
8 awards. Oh. That was fantastic.
That was fun. This was great. I loved it.
Don't go anywhere. I've got one special treat left for you. I managed to get to the Western Writers Association, and I got a great one. Johnny Boggs being serenaded for his 8th Spur Award.
He's got spurs that jingle, 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 and they keep rolling in one by one. Most folks, they only get a single. He's got 8, and we know he's still not done. Oh, Johnny Boggs, we love you 'cause you fly that western flag like nobody's ever done. You have spurs that jingle, 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 and they keep rolling in one by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Spurs for writing western fiction. He's got 8 and he's rolling right along. But we hope that he don't start no fiction. Stick to prose, don't you never write no songs. Oh, Johnny D, oh, can't you see? We're riding through the garden and we're back and you're still right. And spurs that jingle, jingle, jingle. 8 spurs and you're still going strong. 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do we appreciate? 8 spurs and you're still going strong. I knew you would be, and actually you've written several songs, and we expect you in the roundup room to sing about rutabaga.
The Art Dealer Diaries are brought to you by Medicine Man Gallery, located for over 26 years in Tucson, Arizona, specializing in antique Native American art, early Western art, including the famed Maynard Dixon, as well as modern art. You can find everything online at medicinemangallery.com. There's over 6,000 objects to select from. Also, the Charles Bloom Murder Mystery Series, written by yours truly, me, Mark Sublette. There's 6 books in this series, and they follow the protagonist Charles Bloom through all the intrigue of the art world set in Santa Fe and the Navajo Nation. These can be found on Audible, eBooks, Amazon, and of course, the gallery at medicinemangallery.com.